It will appear for the foreseeable future, especially given the trend we now have in front of us. We're going to spend literally every day talking about insecurity and security situation in this country. In recent days, it has been Benue on the one hand, and then it has been Plateau State on the other hand, that have become some sort of hotspots now for attacks here and there. One day is 50 lives gone, the other day is 51, and then you're hearing several sporadic attacks in between both neighboring states. At one point, the theater was the northeast, particularly the states of Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. But today, it has become a widespread element with all of these criminal gangs, or if you like, clusters, taking on different names. But the nomenclature, however, is not as important as the adverse impact that all of these attacks have dealt on Nigerians' lives, property, unquantifiable. Government says they're on top of the situation. Security and defense chiefs tell us that this is a fleeting phase. But the question is, have we not been here since 2010, in the days when Boko Haram was still in its infancy? And today we've seen evolution, the last 15 or so years, of these different elements playing out, particularly in the northern parts of this country. There's practically no states amongst all the 19 states in the north that has not had a little more than its fair share of criminal attacks. Question perhaps is, where do we go from here? We are joined this morning by Gustime Ezekiel. He's an expert in policy, international security, as well as governance. Thank you so very much, Gustime, for making our time to be on the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So, I'm wondering, where do we start from? But we may not have the specific data as to how much of damage has been done. In light of this conversation we're having.
Yeah.
How bad is it?
Well, I think that the security situation generally in Nigeria is at a very terrible state. And as the days goes by, it seems to be even more complex and overwhelming. And so in the northeast, you have some high level of terrorism with the Boko Haram and ISWAP and other groups. And then in the northwest, you also have banditry. Some level of terrorism also creeping into the northwest, and then you see the north central, you have issues of farmer herders conflicts, and then in the southeast you have issues of separatist agitations, and then unknown gunmen and all of that, and then in the southwest you have high rates of kidnapping going on. Same thing applicable to the south. So literally every region of the country today is struggling with high level of insecurity, and perhaps it is even worse when it was in 2015, when we just had Boko Haram in the northeast that Nigeria was battling to deal with. But today is widespread, and it seems that the security agencies to an extent is overwhelmed, and you see this high levels of casualties, civilian casualties happening on a daily basis. The numbers are really very wide, because just less than 2 weeks you've seen over 100 people killed in Plateau State, and that's just one state, right? Just the first quarter of this year, you have over 1,420 Nigerians who have lost their life to violent conflict. So it's really that wide, and you see the government continuously reassuring the people that they are on top of the situation. But I think that we really need to evaluate our security strategies, security and defense strategies, and most importantly, deal with the issues of governance deficits, the widespread social inequality and injustice, and the high level of unemployment, and then the bad politics, right? Identity politics that is widespread in the country, which sometimes seems to be fueling this conflict and insecurity across different states of the country.
Interesting. I mean, the irony of it all is, every time you have this conversation, it's as if it's just becoming more protracted by the day. But let's talk about how all of this evolution has happened. At one point, the only, if you like, terrorist group you had in this country was Boko Haram. So how did we have this replication?
Well, I think that Boko Haram became more profound in 2010, right? And then moving forward, you have the Islamic State of West African Province,
ISWAP.
breaking away from Boko Haram. And then later you have groups like the Ansaru, particularly operating in Kaduna State. And then you also seen recently the Lakarawu group also in Kebbi State, which perhaps has infiltrated the country from neighboring countries like Mali and Niger. And then, but the bottom line of it is that there is a widespread proliferation of small arms and light weapons coming into this side of Africa, right? And that is traceable to the fall of Libya, right? So you can see there's so much arms that are valuable in the hands of these people to use, and so every group that is aggrieved have to organize, and in that they organize against the state, and then the state is also weak to an extent to be able to take absolute control of force within its territories. And so it's complex, but on one hand we are dealing with political issues, on the other hand we are dealing with security issues, we are also dealing with social and economic issues, which are all intertwined. And then you can see the government not having the capacity to deal with these issues decisively. And so we begin to now see different forms of security issues, from terrorism to now banditry. And of course the terrorist crime nexus, where you see terrorists going into crime with bandits and Boko Haram collaborating and all of that. And so it's widespread. And again, the possibility of security agencies being able to label a lot of acts as acts of terrorism is also one of the cases that we have to deal with. And so we do not make our country to look like there is terrorism everywhere, because today we have terrorism in the southeast, which they are now dealing with as an issue of terrorism.
That's the phenomenon of unknown gunmen.
Unknown gunmen. And it's even sad that we have a group of people who are known as unknown gunmen in the country. It shows some lack of intelligence and weak capacity in the part of the actors to now label a particular group as unknown, despite the fact that these people continue to carry out unprecedented attacks, claiming lives and properties and causing so much fear in the hearts and lives of the people within this area. So our security agencies need to do more. There needs to be more collaborations between the governments, both at the federal and state level. And most importantly, to address these issues more effectively, we need to consider the issue of state police, which will require us to now decentralize security, not just concentrating at the federal level, but also at the state level. So states, governments can also have the capacity to be able to deal with the issues more decisively in their various territories.
Interesting. In law and criminology, motive is a very core element, right?
Yes.
I hear people say that when you see things like, this scale of attacks that were found in the country, especially in recent history, it's always as a result of the fact that there's a group of people that feels, marginalized, neglected, aggrieved, what have you. But we've seen people who have been kidnapped and released. They come to tell tales of how that their kidnappers looked very comfortable, educated, elitists in their disposition and all of that. So how do we marry these two scenarios?
So first and foremost, I believe that there is a thriving crime economy in Nigeria.
Thriving crime economy? Crime
economy in Nigeria, which propels people to go into crime. And because we have made it to be a very lucrative venture, right? Because if crime is not lucrative, we shouldn't be seeing this high level of crime happening in the country. And at the same time, politics is part of it. Right, so you can see political actors playing their respective roles at different levels. But in the midst of all of this, we have to consider the fact that we need to really deal with the crime economy in Nigeria, because there are some of these groups who do not have an ideology. there is no objective. The underlying interest or the underlying idea behind this is economic gain, and we need to consider that. So, for instance, there is no clear ideology of banditry in Nigeria. It's purely economical, right? So you see bandits kidnapping people and demanding ransom, and you see bandits going into some level of economic activities like gold mining, particularly in the north western part of Nigeria. So you can see this collaboration between bandits, and then you see some level of elite collusion, right? So there are elites who have strong interest in the local economy, right, particularly in the gold sector. And so you see some strong political elites who are funding crime in different parts of the country to push both their economic and political agendas. And these issues have to be dealt with decisively.
There are analysts, experts like yourself, who now say that one of the reasons it will be extremely difficult, quite difficult to deal with this issue of insecurity is that the, like you called it, thriving crime economy element is now involved in it. There was a point in this country where both the police and loved ones of kidnapped persons would say no, we didn't pay ransom, we didn't pay ransom. So there was a debate back and forth as to whether or not ransom was paid. Right, today there's a flip to that. We're no longer debating whether or not ransom has been paid. It's not a question of how much was paid, to whom it was paid, and all of that. How more complicated does this make the situation?
Well, so just between the first quarter of 2025, over $1 billion was paid as ransom. So the question is, where did the money come from? Who was the money paid into, right? So the security agencies, right, need to be able to track all of this. We can't tell ourselves that these issues are not traceable, right, because there are conversations, right, there is communication. Whether money was paid through bank transfers, in most cases they don't really do bank transfer, but sometimes they even do through cash, sometimes they do. POS has also become one of the ways ransom is now being paid. So you see sometimes these criminal elements carrying POS machines and all of that to be able to withdraw money so that they cannot be traced. But the fact remains that every Nigerian who operates the Nigerian banking system have what they call the biometric verification number. You have BVN, you have, let's say, credible form of identification that they can use. And then also today, if you're using a smartphone, for you to have a SIM card, it has to be registered with your details, right? So when we see issues like kidnapping and then ransom being paid and all of that, the first thing is that, as a very cultural people and family-oriented country, when your loved one is kidnapped and then the kidnappers are threatened, there is a high probability of the families, right, provided that they have the capacity to be able to raise that funding to be able to rescue their loved ones, right, before they get killed, because you can't compare the pains of losing the loved one to the amount of money you can pay to getting the loved one alive. So you can see Nigerians doing that to be able to rescue their loved ones, and that is because in most times there is a trust deficit, because people no longer trust the ability of the states and the security agencies to be able to rescue the victims in most instances. But then there needs to be more collaboration between the families and then the security agencies in terms of not just releasing the victims, right, but what happened to the criminals, what happened to the perpetrators, because most times we hear that this person was kidnapped and this person has been released, but what happened to the kidnappers? It shows a high level of weak capacity on the part of the Nigerian state and of course the security agencies. But more so, it also boils down to the fact that our security agencies are underfunded, right? They need to be given the required support, by the states, the federal government, in terms of the required funding, the training and retraining that is required.
Are we not doing enough with our budgetary allocation in that regard?
So this year, the federal government budgeted the highest for defense and security, but that is not the case in most of the states. So you can see some states are budgeting below 2% for security, below 5% for security, and that is because in most cases, the security architecture of Nigeria belongs to the federal government and the federal exclusively. So you see the federal government funding more of the security, and the only role that the states play is to just collaborate and then support the agencies and officials operating within their territory. So if we can decentralize security, particularly the policing system, the police architecture, we can see states being committed to providing adequate funding to the state's police. Although there could be issues, right? But there's a possibility that things will get better if that is done.
All right, we're taking a break shortly, but then I want to talk about decentralizing our policing system.
Yeah.
I mean, go to other crimes.
Yes.
Maybe US readily comes to mind in this sense. You see, of course, there's the federal police.
And even in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. You see the police departments across the states. New York Police Department, LA, PE, and what have you. In Nigeria, of course, we've been having that conversation for a while now, which essentially brought about the Amoteco, and then there was going to be Bubiago or so in the southeast as well, and all of that. Amoteco was also a struggle because the then Attorney General of the Federation, and also had railed against it very vehemently and all of that, but today, of course, is here to stay. The National Economic Council, right, led by the Vice President or chaired by the Vice President, also is having that conversation. State governors had been asked to come up with their proposal and stuff like that. Are we ready for this conversation, regardless of all of the hoopla and the hula balu and razzmatazz, as we're saying right now?
I think Nigeria is ready for state policing, and there is no better time for us to consider it than now that virtually all states in the country are struggling to secure lives and properties. And what is the essence of the police in the first place? Is to protect life and properties, maintain law and order. And so the issue is that the policing system we have in Nigeria as it is today is not really serving, particularly at the grassroots level, right? And this is because of the system we have in place. So if we truly want to address first the issues of insecurity in states, we need to consider state policing, because it provides the opportunity for states to recruit people who are familiar with the territories, people who understand how the environments work, people who are knowledgeable, and people who know the actors. And so it makes it easier for states to effectively protect their territories against criminal elements. Now, on the other hand, the federal police is actually trying. They're trying their best. But for me, one of the things I consider to be the limiting factors is that it is grossly underfunded.
As the police?
Right? Yes, the police is grossly underfunded in terms of the arms and munitions, right? Because you see most of the criminals, the kidnappers, and then the terrorists, the kind of arms that they use, the police can't withstand them in most instances because they have more sophisticated weapons, and they are ready to invest heavily into the crimes that they commit. And right, so on the other hand, we also have issues of underfunding of the security officials, right, in the second instance, because how much are they paid, right? So we now talk about issues of motivation, right? Most of them are not really motivated to do the job that they do, because they are underpaid and then they are underfunded. And then you can see that with Nigeria's current economy, even for most middle class elites are struggling. So how much more those people who are vested with the responsibility of protecting life and properties, when they think about their families back home and then how much they're likely going to run away from crime scenes, right? So the government needs to consider first and foremost ensuring adequate pay for our security officials, right? Adequate pay, and then also providing some level of life insurance, right? Sharing from my own personal experience, I had a cousin who was shot in the line of duty and he was abandoned. He's a police officer. He was shot a day to the 2019 Bayelsa State governorship election, right, while he was on duty, and he was abandoned to cater for himself. And so you see most personnel not receiving the kind of support that they need when they become victim of incidents in the line of duty. And the highest thing government can do is to maybe give them some level of official burial. But what happened to their families afterwards? So you need to consider providing these incentives that enables them to do their job more effectively, right, without giving into the compromise. And this is the reason why you see a lot of corruption, right, particularly the police in Nigeria, where you see police officers collecting bribes and then facilitating crimes and all of that. Sometimes I do not blame them as an individual, because I know how difficult it is for people to survive in this country. And so that is not a support for crime, that is not a support for compromise. But I think on the part of the government, they need to review how our security agencies are treated. This is not just the police. It talks about the army, the navy, and all of that. We cannot have a country where people in government, where legislators are collecting and receiving monthly hardship allowance, while those who face the true hardship are receiving peanuts by the end of the month, because most of them are just struggling to go by the day and cater for the demands and pressures that comes with having family responsibilities. And so we shouldn't be wondering why the police are not really doing the job the way they ought to be doing it and all of that. This is because they are underfunded, right? There's widespread injustice, right, both on the part of the government and then on the part of the other actors. But we need to consider evaluating our security and defense frameworks, right, and being able to address the issues that matters the most.
Okay, there's the concern around the state policing idea. Basically, people say governors will abuse it.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm asking questions about, hold on a second, how many governors have ever, even though the Constitution does not mandate them to, all right, give accounts of how they spend security vote, for example? I mean, as a career broadcaster, only once in my lifetime I got the chance to see the security vote for a particular state somewhere in the south.
Yes.
All right, for the year 2020. All right, it was 500 million for every other month for that budgetary year. We understand as it stands today, because of how rife insecurity has become, especially in the southeast and up north, there are states that get governors, I should say in this case, get as much as 1 billion and even in excess of 1 billion every other month. Some of them, they run around, they buy a few cars for the police. Maybe in a space of 4 years, 8 years as they are in office, they do that maybe two, 3 times. All right, and then the rest is history. So, do these governors, all right, do they make commensurate investments in their states as against what they get by way of security vote? Because a while ago you were painting a picture of how abysmal the investment, the budgetary allocation of states is when it comes to security.
So first and foremost, the issue of whether state governance are going to abuse state policing or not. We have a system in Nigeria, right, where abuse of power is widespread. And so even the presidency abuses state power. For instance, the removal of the governor of Rivers State, which is an unconstitutional act. But because the president have the powers to do that, so if the president can do that, we shouldn't be afraid of.
But does he have the power, or he feels he has the power? Which of that?
He doesn't have the powers, but he feels he have the
So he
power.
arrogates it to himself.
He arrogates to himself, and by virtue of what transpired at the National Assembly, which is very embarrassing to most of us as Nigerians, abuse of power is widespread phenomenon in Nigeria. And so there is nowhere in Nigeria where power is not abused by either at the federal level or at the state level. But the most important thing shouldn't be whether state policing will be abused by governance or not. The argument should be if state policing will provide more security in the states. If it will help the governors to provide adequate security for their people, because the governors are the chief security officers of their state.
Is that in theory? I mean, is that in principle or in practice?
Well, I think that is in both in principle and in practice. But what we are seeing is that there is a deficiency in the ability of the state government to be able to play that role excellently, because there are limitations. And one of the limitations they have is the fact that they do not have control over the security architectures within the state. And so, especially when you have this level of bad politics in Nigeria, where most especially if the governor is not in good terms with the president, or maybe because of party differences, and then you see governors even raising allegations against commissioners of police, calling them out. There seems to be a high level of trust deficits between the states and then the security architecture that we have in Nigeria as it is presently. And so what we need to do is that we need to decentralize security first in Nigeria, so that we can, the states will be able to respond more effectively to the challenges that they are facing. In terms of funding, accountability or lack of accountability is one of the key issues we are facing in Nigeria in terms of our democracy and our governance system in Nigeria. And lack of accountability is widespread. Right, so if we can entrust these enormous resources to the federal government, so why can't we trust the states? Because there will be abuse of power at every point in time. But what we need to do is to be able to put system that holds leaders accountable at every time. So what we should be talking about is accountability, right, and not whether there will be abuse of power or not. In terms of capacity and funding, I believe that states can do more in terms of funding for security when they have that direct responsibility, provided that the current system we operate is concerned. There is not much responsibility on the part of states to fund security, especially the police, right? And then the police, and then you have the Nigerian Civil Security, NCDC, and most, because they're not the direct responsibility of the state governors. And so sometimes even when state governors provide funding for them to an extent, maybe getting them equipment, getting them arms, getting them operational vans and vehicles and all of that, the intention is to support the work that they are doing as part of the collaborative effort to provide security in their state, and for them to be able to even perform their roles as governors, right, as the chief security officers of their states. But beyond that, if there is now a constitutional decentralization of police in Nigeria, every state will now be absolutely responsible for funding security and police in their respective states, which means they need to increase the budgetary allocations in their state. And presently, I'm working on a project where I'm looking at 2025 budgets, right, for, let me say, the states in the 9 states in the Niger Delta, and I can see how much is being allocated by each of the states to security, right? So you can see some states providing funding for police services, right, but other states don't. So, and then you also have the issue of security votes, which you mentioned, and to a great extent, majority of Nigerians and as analysts, we believe that there's a widespread corruption around the concept of security votes in Nigeria, particularly at the state level. But the fact remains that most of these states utilizes this funding to support the federal securities operational in their respective state. Of course, there's widespread corruption in Nigeria, and that shouldn't be reason why this shouldn't be there. But you see some states are not really budgeting much for security votes, right? Others are budgeting much for security votes. But in most instances, one of the things we need to do is to have a more transparent budgeting system, right, at the subnational level, so that people can see what the security votes are meant for. The security vote shouldn't be spent just at the discretion of the governors, but there should be intentional framework or budgetary allocations to how the security vote is going to be spent across the fiscal year.
Is there a law? Are there guidelines to help create some sort of guardrails for these governors? Because we understand that their latitude in this regard is unlimited.
Well, I think that in the first instance, there are no specific guidelines to be able to compel governors to do that, but it falls under what we can describe as maybe the ability of the Nigerian state to be able to strengthen governance, to be able to strengthen transparency and accountability in governance. Let people know that political actors need to be aware that they have to be held account for every action they take in government, for every penny that they spend in government. And so we have to be able to reduce this high level of politicking that happens within our governance system in Nigeria, where you see because a particular governor who has been accused of corruption now because he's in the ruling party, and then those issues seems to be dropped off because they're just around the corridors of power. That shouldn't be the case. Everyone should be held accountable, irrespective of the camp that you belong to. That way we can actually have a better country and a more secured country, because people shouldn't be treated based on their affiliations. People should be treated based on who they are and the actions or the inactions that they have taken that are directly or indirectly against the state and then institutional processes as well.
All right, I think this is a good place for us to break it down for a second. All right, we're looking at security situation in the country, especially as it has to do with the north. Now, particularly Benue and of course, Plateau states. Those are just the two flashpoints at the moment, and the president has condemned these killings. Governors across the country, including the governors of these two states concerned, have also come out to speak up against it. One of them, Governor of Plateau State, His Excellency Caleb Mutfwang, has categorically apologized, owning up that the state has failed in this regard. That goes without saying. After this break, we'll look at what exactly does ECOWAS politics mean for security, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. We'll unpack all of that for you on the flip side of this break. Thank you so very much for staying with us, everyone. So, Gustam, let's talk about, some people say it's geopolitics, but let's talk about the ECOWAS bloc.
Yes.
Burkina Faso, Mali, and Nigeria Republic have left the bloc.
Yes.
One of the fears that experts expressed at that point was that this will further create an opening for influx of all the criminal elements you can imagine into and out of Nigeria. Talk to us about that window.
So first and foremost, our border security in Nigeria today is very poor, right? So our borders are porous, which also facilitate the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and with all sorts of criminal elements also infiltrating into the country from the northern side, especially from Niger and then from Mali and then other aspects. So now, prior to this time, we have the some level of the security collaborations, right? We have some level of security collaborations between the states. And let's not forget that Niger is just a border country to Nigeria. And Niger pulling out of Nigeria at this point will create a room for exploitation by criminal elements, and because there will be some level of fractured security collaborations right now happening between the countries. So Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso breaking away from ECOWAS to now form the alliance of Sahel states is going to be a big setback to ECOWAS. So politically, in terms of regional integration, in terms of economic mobility, and all of that. So we are going to be having a situation where there will be less collaborations, right, between member states, because in the first place, these states are supposed to be working together, right, to address issues of insecurity, right, issues of regional integration, governance, and then development within the sub-region. And now for political reasons, you can see them pulling out. So it's going to have severe consequences for us, particularly Nigerians, because we understand that the undocumented migration that happens between Niger and Nigeria within this axis is unprecedented, right? So now you can see some level of unwillingness on the part of the Nigerian actors to collaborate with Nigeria. And of course, you know the role that Nigeria play, right, in the decision to invade Niger Republic, right, that made the other countries, Mali and Burkina Faso, to say, hey, see, any attack on Niger Republic will be seen, any attack on Mali or Niger, any of these countries, right, will be seen as an attack in the rest of these countries. And so you see these people now coming together to form an alliance, and of course you see the role that geopolitics is currently playing within our region. And so you have a lot of missionaries coming into the region, and let's not forget that the underlying issues on our own parts remains unaddressed, and so we are creating more room that can be exploited, which I believe will lead to an increasing rise of insecurity, and then perhaps the infiltration of criminal elements like we have seen in Kebbi State and all of that. So I think that beyond the fact that these states have pulled away from ECOWAS, there needs to be a genuine effort for collaboration, because the issues that affect us are common, and pulling away from ECOWAS doesn't excuse Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso from experiencing these issues of insecurity. And so on our own part, especially on the part of the political actors, there needs to be more collaborations, and there needs to be more genuine frameworks to address the issues that affect all of the states.
There was a time in this country, especially under former President Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, there were calls for us to reach out to the United Kingdom, to the US, to come give us some assistance. Later we heard stories about them not willing to sell weapons to Nigeria, and so on and so forth. Are we still having that conversation?
Well, I think that so when Jonathan left office, there was a time that the U.S. government approved the sales of arms to the Buhari government, right? And for us, this is part of the bigger politics that transpired within the Obama regime and then the Jonathan administration in Nigeria. And so there were issues of sales of arms to Nigerian fighter jet and all of that to Nigerian, to the Nigerian military, which to an extent, right, supported in the counter-terrorism war in the northeastern part of the country. But the issues that perhaps have limited this level of collaborations and transactions is the fact that there seems to be a high level of, let's say, abuse of power, right? There seems to be a high level of abuse of power, and then abuse of human rights, right? Abuse of power, abuse of human rights. And so these countries are being very careful to an extent in terms of selling arms and fighter jets. We've seen the Nigerian Air Force bombing communities in the northern part of this country, and they said it was a mistake, and these mistakes keep occurring almost every year, frequently. I think towards the last quarter of last year till this, I think we have experienced one or two incidents of accidental bombing of communities, and so you see security operatives in search of in their drive to combating criminals, terrorist actors, and then maybe bandits thereabouts. So you see them accidentally detonating explosive on communities. So these are some of the fears, and this thing should be happening on a regular basis, right? In the first instance, Nigeria is let me say, as the giant of Africa, as we call it, right? Nigeria should be able to invest in its military industrial complex, right? To be able to produce some of these arms that we need at this point. Nigeria is not at war with any country, right? We are just at war internally. And so what if we happen to be at war with any other country? Like what would have happened maybe in Niger Republic when ECOWAS wanted to
put on a standby force.
Exactly. And so because if ECOWAS had invaded Niger Republic, definitely the retaliation would have come directly to Nigeria, because Nigeria was at the front line of using military force to restore democratic governance in Niger Republic. And so when we begin to experience this high level of dependency, right, on foreign powers for military support and interventions, not like we do not have the resources to be able to put these things in place. Of course we have the resources, we have the capacity to be able to do that, but over-reliance on foreign military support is a big issue for us. And so when genuine concerns are being expressed for reasons why arms should not be sold to Nigeria and the Nigerian military for the fight against insecurity, a responsible country should be able to look inward and say, what can we do? What investments can we make, right? So maybe within the next 10 to 15 years, we should be able to produce this capacity or this level of arms for our military, for our security agencies, right? So when public policies have to be made around those areas, first and foremost, the government have to be able to consider if they are going to produce these arms by themselves or they are going to buy. And in most instances, buying is always more expensive, right? You can get the best out there, but you can also produce the best, right, to handle your situations
locally.
Right? Yeah, locally. And so we need to do more in terms of investing in our security at a national level, right? Not always buying arms and all of that. Most countries across the world do buy arms, but in most cases they do buy arms for, let's say, inter-country conflicts, right? So you see Ukraine, Russia, and then you can see that, okay, Ukraine is needing more help from the European Union, from the US, and then from, let's say, from NATO alliance and all of that. And so you see what is happening in the Middle East, Israel, and then the Hamas, and then so you can see Israel buying more weapons from the United States, and then getting this level of support from its alliances. And but our situations here are not really that complex. We are just struggling to deal with internal issues. Of course, there seems to be some level of sabotage that is being faced by the system, but most importantly, we need to be able to come to a point where we decide that, see, we are going to solve our problems by ourselves.
We need to talk about sabotage real soon. I mean, compromise and all of that. But again, we'll talk about ECOWAS.
Yes.
Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic are now tilted towards Russia. Should Nigeria follow that path?
Well, I do not think that Nigeria should follow the path of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic, right? Moving towards Russia. As a matter of fact, Nigeria have always maintained this level of neutrality in terms of alliance, in terms of global alliance. Nigeria have always this non-aligned policy and all of that. So Nigeria have not really taken a side in terms of where they want to go to, in terms of the geopolitics that we experience today. But the fact remains that the US is working with Nigeria, China is working with Nigeria, and there seems to be some level of collaboration between Nigeria and Russia, right, with Nigeria trying to join BRICS with the acceptance of Russia and all of that. At the broader level, I believe that Nigeria does not necessarily need to join Russia to be able to position itself strategically as a regional power. Or maybe compete favorably, right, internationally. But why Nigeria cannot do that, why Nigeria cannot operate in isolation, Nigeria needs to be more careful in terms of its alliances. I do not see Russia to be an option. Now, the reason why most of these countries, Niger Republic, Mali, and Burkina Faso, are moving towards Russia is because they feel more safe working with Russia than working with the other alliances. And of course, you see the role that France has also played, and then the relationship between France and other big powers as well. So you see these countries, I'm telling France, in terms of trying to cut bilateral relationship with France, right, and even the United States to an extent. And so moving towards Russia to an extent because they feel like, okay, they are more safe relating with Russia, and because Russia has not really played a significant role, but it's more like a slave who is being selectively, or who is being selective in choosing his master. So like you are moving away from one imperialist, and then you now, okay, maybe I am not really feeling so safe with this slave master, maybe I need to like move to the next slave. So it's like people who are in chains trying to select who should be their master. These countries are capable of building their own capacity, right, to be able to address the issues that they are facing. But internationally, right, you cannot take away the place of alliance and collaboration in international politics and security. And so they are at will, right, to relate it whoever they want to relate to it, provided that it fulfills their national interest, right. But in the long run, I do not see that to be a very effective security alliance, right, in the part of these countries. Most importantly, we need to deal with internal issues that we are facing. But in the case of Nigeria, I believe that Nigeria can do better if we address the internal issues that we face first and foremost, because nobody is going to come from anywhere to solve our problems for us. The US is not going to come to Nigeria to solve our problems. The UK is not going to come to Nigeria to solve our problems. France, Russia, China, they are only going to support us according to the best of their abilities. But they're not going to abandon the challenges they have all over the world to come to Nigeria to solve our problems. So Nigeria, I think that it is better for Nigeria to relate with countries the way they are relating, because Nigeria does not really have enemies around the world.
So more of neutrality.
More of neutrality. I think it pays Nigeria better. So it gives them the opportunity to relate with countries the way they are doing. Because if Nigeria tried to relate more closely with Russia, it's going to be detrimental to the country in terms of the Western friends, right? The Western friends, and then saying Nigeria to be a threat. Because if you're relating with my enemy, I'm not going to trust you to deal with you. I'll probably see you as a potential enemy as well. So Nigeria should just be around where it is today. Should build the capacity to be able to address internal problems, and then more like play a more profound role at the regional level, right? Or that will serve Nigeria better.
Let's bring this back to where we started from, which is coal. issues around fifth columnists have been also identified as a problem in the fight against insurgency or all of these banditry that we see right now. Is it ever possible to address very squarely and totally having fifth columnists in the army, in the police, and all of that? Because how do you explain that there is a strategy to maybe hit a terrorist, say, sports, all right, or their enclave, and the next thing you know is they ambush the troops, and you're hearing that our men have been taken out. Sometimes the commander even neutralized. I mean, how do we deal with the fifth colonists?
And so, when it comes to dealing with issues of internal sabotage, right, within our security system in Nigeria, first and foremost, we need to be able to separate security from politics. We need to be able to deal with security issues as security issues and deal with political issues as political issues. The problem we are having is that there's a high level of politics, right? So politicizing our security strategies, right? And so as a country, and of course the security and intelligence agencies, there needs to be internal monitoring systems, because these events have happened again and again, particularly in the Northeast, where you've seen troops crying out that they were ambushed. So it boils down to how the security and intelligence architecture is organized in the first place. The recruitment process, where political actors have to recommend, right, people into the military, people into the police, people into the security and intelligence agencies in Nigeria, their loyalty in most cases are to those people. And of course, you know that the counter-terrorism war in Nigeria is also a very politicized issue that we have in Nigeria. And so we first and foremost, the security agencies need to do what I call internal auditing, right? All of these instances, we haven't been able to hold accountable who is responsible for sabotaging the efforts, right, of the security operations in most cases, because we should be able to hold somebody accountable that say, you give the information to these people that ambushed the troops to carry out this level of counter-attack and all of that. And most instances it happens even before the troop arrives at their destination. So there needs to be internal auditing, and then there needs to be some level of the use of technologies, right, to be able to monitor and track, and so that we'll be able to know who is the informant, right? But these issues are really very complex, and sometimes it's not so easy for us to talk about them on TV this way, because they are really key security issues. And for me, I believe that key security issues are better addressed off the camera, right? But I think that the security architectures really need to do more in terms of auditing that personnel, starting from the process of recruitment. People should be recruited based on their own merits, right? And their own will, not because of recommendation from a politician, not because of recommendation from a traditional ruler. It shouldn't be seen as a job that people can just take on. This should be done in line with people's commitment to be patriotic, right? And so you have a lot of people who are not being patriotic, joining the security and defense structures that we have in Nigeria. So I should be able to join the military because I'm patriotic, because I want to defend my country.
And you're eligible.
Yes, and not because I want to see it as a job, right? I want to see it as a job, or I want to see it as a platform for building my political portfolio, because most of the times these security personnel are being recommended or nominated by politicians just because they feel like they have some level. And of course, they are most loyal to these political actors that places them in this position. So we need to, first and foremost, relieve our security agencies and security actors from this ethnic and divisive politics, and of course the politics of loyalty that we see in Nigeria. Security agencies should be loyal to Nigeria, right, as a country. They shouldn't be loyal to a politician, a political party, or a set of political actors. And for us to be able to address all of these issues, we need to consider internally auditing the system that is currently in place so that we'll be able to make improvements.
All right. I think that's a fine place for us to leave this conversation, everyone. I'd like to say a big thank you to you.
And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Ezekiel is a governance, of course, as well as a security expert, here to talk to us about some of these issues we're dealing with in this country and recommending as well specifics that can be carried out both short, medium, and long term to arrest this issue. We'll take a quick break, everyone. When we return, myself and my colleague will wrap it up for you on Global Morning. Do stay with us.